Hello and welcome to this Negotiating the New Normal session. I'm Adam Bates and we are going to be hearing from Renee Cummings. I just want to make sure that I am appearing on the screen at the moment, because on my screen it looks as if I'm not. So before I bowl into it, if I could just get a nod from producer here, that would be fantastic. Okay, thank you very much. We are good to go. So Renee Cummings is going to be talking about algorithmic justice. So if you were to count all of the things and all of the strings Renee has to her bow, you'd run out of fingers. She is the historic first data activist in residence at the School of Data Science, University of Virginia, and a community scholar at Columbia University. She's an international criminal justice consultant and criminologist. She's a criminal psychologist, substance abuse therapist, crisis intelligence and communication specialist, rehabilitation specialist, and it doesn't end there. She's also a renowned spearhead for social justice, diversity, and inclusion in the field of artificial intelligence, and is the founder of Urban AI, working to ensure ethical AI adoption and algorithmic authenticity and accountability. What drives her above all else, though, in her own words, is giving a voice to the voiceless. She's going to give her plenary talk that will reveal why fighting for algorithmic justice achieves just that, and how it must be a priority as we negotiate the new normal. Then in the second half of this session, we'll be posing any questions that you have to Renee, so do get submitting them underneath the video you're watching. So let me welcome Renee and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's certainly an honor and a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm really excited about this event and what this event offers, of course, internationally, what it offers for the future of law and what it really offers for the future of society. So I have a PowerPoint that I want to share. And I think I can't do that right now. So let's have this conversation and let's have this conversation going. So one of the things that I love to do is really to speak and to engage audiences and to really bring people on board, because I think conversations change lives and conversations are critical to the kind of work that we've all got to do. And I am a firm believer that we are all inherently activists. There's a spirit of activism in each and every one of us. So there's a big conversation happening right now about artificial intelligence. And because of COVID-19, artificial intelligence has been fast-tracked because the world is now looking towards techno-solutionism to come up with many of the answers required for some of the big challenges in society. So where are we with AI? I do work at the intersection of artificial intelligence and criminal justice, which means my focus is on urban criminology, epidemiological criminology, and many different strains of criminology, and how artificial intelligence informs that. Today, we're going to have a conversation about big data policing, because it's something that's happening behind the scenes, and we need to remove the veil and pull it forward. So let's talk about algorithms. So most of us have come face to face with an algorithm, but we may not really know that at this moment. If you're using your smartphone, if you're using Netflix, if you're doing any kind of online shopping, and those are some of the basics, you've probably used an algorithm. If you use Facebook, if you use Instagram, if you use Twitter, you are using algorithms, and these algorithms predict your behavior. It's as though they are doing a cognitive function. So we're using the computer, we're using what we call machine learning and artificial intelligence to do predictive work for us. So if you watched a movie on Netflix, something comes up saying, if you've liked this, you're probably going to like that. The same thing when you do shopping. Well, algorithms are also being used in criminal justice, in particular policing, big data policing. which means we're using data to predict the behavior of persons who are supposed to perpetrate, or who we think have the propensity or the proclivity to perpetrate a crime. So this is what's happening. The algorithms are saying these are the individuals who have the propensity, but are these algorithms actually correct? So some of the things that we've seen so far in sentencing, we're seeing that algorithms are predicting whether someone is going to reoffend. But what we're also seeing about those algorithms is that these algorithms are overestimating who is going to reoffend, or the rate of recidivism. And it's actually overestimating the rate of reoffending for Black, Indigenous people of color, as opposed for white individuals. So what does that say? There's a certain measure of bias in the algorithms. We're also seeing the algorithms in the correction setting, where individuals who are incarcerated, who are looking for a parole, who want to be released, have found themselves face to face in court, battling an algorithm to get justice. And in big data policing, what we're also seeing is that this algorithm is now playing the role of a detective, an undercover officer, doing a lot of covert operations. And we're seeing police departments across the world being able to access big tech companies and get your data. What we're calling geofencing or geolocation warrants or digital subpoenas. And what's happening to a lot of people has been digital arrests. So you're being arrested in a digital space before you've been arrested physically, and unaware of that. What's also happening with these algorithms is a particular tool by the name of facial recognition. And facial recognition has been very, very controversial. Why is that? Because these algorithms are misbehaving. So one of the things about facial recognition is that it has promised a lot. It has promised a requisite level of accuracy that it has not matured to create. The other thing about facial recognition is it is unable to recognize dark-skinned individuals, women in particular, or people of color in general. So we have had situations already of mistaken identity or wrongful arrest because of this technology. So algorithms at the intersection of criminal justice are creating a suite of technologies that are working against Black, Indigenous people of color, that are actually being weaponized. So how is this being weaponized? By our data. The data that has been used, the data that's been collected to create many of these criminal justice tools that are infused with artificial intelligence. And if you think about artificial intelligence, there's something called coding. And coding is like the literacy, the language. And coding is what instructs the computer to come up with the kinds of decisions that it comes up with. So there's some big questions here. How do you code? What is the statistic or the mathematical formula for justice? What's the mathematical formula for fairness? And I want you to just think about those things. So what we are seeing is biased data, data that discriminates. And data has a memory beyond the computational memory that we know. It has an historic memory. And much of the data that we are using today in many of these systems is haunted by the ghost of colonization, by oppression, by the sociological origins of statistics that worked in favor of the settlers as opposed to indigenous communities. And what we are seeing is that the biases, the discrimination, systemic racism baked into the data sets that we continue to use. And just think about the fact that only about 50 years ago, eugenics and social Darwinism came out of the academic halls when it came to understanding science. And that is coming out of the books, not coming out of the mentality. So when we're thinking about these data sets, when we're thinking about the kind of data that's been used, we're realizing that the data is too biased and too much expressions of oppression exist today in the data. So how do we distill that? Is it going to be something technological? Do we have to create an algorithm to check these algorithms are we using? Or is it going to take a social system to check society and to check ourselves? So things like implicit bias, subconscious bias, all of these things are now in the conversation as we are trying to build a really rigorous and robust framework for AI ethics. And AI ethics is the space in which I stand at this moment. And as you said, Adam, I am the data activist in residence at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. So I say that I am not a data scientist. What I am is the conscience of a data scientist as a data activist. So I look at things like AI justice or algorithmic justice or algorithmic injustice. I look at design and justice, design ethics. I look at data justice, human rights, civil rights, and concepts such as a duty of care and due process, and why we have got to be constantly vigilant and apply due diligence to the process of classifying data, to the process of designing the research questions, because there is inherent privilege and power in the ways in which we go about research. And all of that finds itself spiraling into the AI equation. So when we think about AI justice, we have got to think about our rights. And we say that data is power, and indeed it is very powerful. Data is also the lifeblood of artificial intelligence. Because of COVID-19, as I've said, the world is not turning back. It is moving forward. And the more we move forward, the more we are leaning on technological solutions to find the answers that we need. So how are you going to operate in the realm of criminal justice now that you know that you are being digitally profiled? Well, what we're seeing because of big data policing, because of these risk assessment tools or algorithmic decision-making systems that are being used in the courts, because of algorithms that are being used in corrections and offender management and public safety, you've got to think about your rights as a citizen. You've got to think about how your data is being used. You have got to think of concepts such as privacy and security as they pertain to your data, or a concept such as data sovereignty and how that impacts you. Communities of color and indigenous communities, native communities across the world are thinking about that. And you've got to ask yourself, where is your data being used at this moment? Who has your images at this moment? And at any moment, your data could be weaponized against you. So we've got to think about that question of justice. We've got to think about, now that we are moving more and more into data-driven technologies and data-driven solutions, and how new and emerging technologies are impacting us, we've got to think about those risks. And we've got to think about, how do we mitigate a risk such as bias? How do we mitigate prejudice? How do we mitigate systemic racism? And how do we come up with the formula to ensure that algorithms deliver justice? So as we move forward as a society, you're going to have to ask yourselves some critical questions. And you are going to ask yourselves, where do I stand in this space? And it's about public education. And this is why I just wanted to have this conversation today. It's about public awareness. And what is demanded more and more at this time is stakeholder engagement. And we are all stakeholders in that process. So in whatever field that you are in whatever industry that you are in, you are going to find more and more you are coming face to face with algorithms that are making these decisions. And it's not only criminal justice, it's in healthcare as we move more towards precision medicine. And what we're realizing, even with precision medicine, it is personalized and precise for who? Because we're seeing that the lack of diversity in data sets creating a problem again for Black, Indigenous people of color. We're seeing it in finance, credit scores, loans, education, politics. We are seeing it everywhere. And this is why I am so forceful when I speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as an AI strategist, I work a lot with organizations to develop ethical organizational cultures for organizations that are deploying new and emerging technologies. And I'd say that diversity, equity, and inclusion has got to be a response, just one response, because there are many responses. And we've got to be bold enough to ask the tough questions. We've got to be prepared for the uncomfortable answers. We've got to be prepared for some very painful truths about who we are as a society and who we are as individuals and how much of that is being encoded in new and emerging technologies. So with diversity, equity, and inclusion, we can strive for inclusive technology. We can strive for diverse individuals at the table as we design, develop, and deploy technologies like artificial intelligence. And of course, equity is critical because we must ensure where there is diversity in gender and sexuality, in access, in mobility, in opportunity, in geography, that we bring all of these individuals to the table and we create seats. And not only do we create seats, but we give people an opportunity to contribute. So I know this is a lot. And it is a huge area, and it is a very interesting area as more and more of your data is being used. What we're seeing on the international level would be AI expansionism, what's being called the digital Cold War, and more you're probably hearing the word AI, artificial intelligence, and you've got to ask yourself, what is my role at this moment? How do I begin to advocate for my own rights? How do I begin to advocate for the rights of my community? How do I press my government on coming up with a policy and ensuring that policy serves public interest and not only private interest? And you've got to tell yourself that you can do something in this moment and at this time to really reframe the conversation, because arraignment by AI or arraignment by algorithms or algorithms administering justice, although at first it was about expediency, what we're seeing now is eroding equity, and it's eroding equality and your basic rights. These foundational principles are now being compromised. So I know there may be some questions, and I'm going to stop here and I'm going to throw it back to Adam. And what I'm saying to you, if there's anything that you can take away from this conversation, is the fact that math is not objective as we say it is. It is definitely subjective. Science is not as neutral as it has professed to be. It is certainly an area where we've got to look at. The numbers are never right. There always is more to those numbers. Math must have a moral, and data science must have a conscience, and I am that conscience. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Renee. That was as eye-opening as it was absorbing. You're right, there is a chance now for questions to come in. If you do have a question for Renee, then you can comment underneath the video that you're watching, and we'll be able to put it to Renee in the remaining time that we have. So you've talked there about the increasing use of algorithms in healthcare, credit scores, etc., as well as policing. To be frank, how worried should we be about the trajectory we're on if nothing is done to the status quo, if nothing is done to mitigate the current bias that exists?
I think we should be terrified. We should be absolutely terrified, because most people have no clue. Because you see, we go on these social media platforms and we click and click and click and share, and we click and share our lives away, and we're not understanding that that data is being tabulated, that data is being monetized, that data is being weaponized, and often weaponized against you. So you've got to be very concerned. It's just not about fun and folly and entertainment. There is something very direct and predictive about social media, about your data, particularly now because of COVID-19, because the world is looking for more solutions, in particular contactless solutions, because no one wants to be infected or to become a victim of COVID-19. And we're seeing societies moving faster. When you look at the kinds of investments that are being made in the US, particularly in China, that has taken it to a whole different level of surveillance. And that's a different question, a different answer for a different day. When you look at what's going on in Europe and you look at the kinds of investments that are being made, and then you think of other countries that are unable to do that. So the world is moving so fast, and some of us are never going to be able to catch up. Data is power. It is the lifeblood of this technology, and your data at this very moment could be used, or is probably being used, in a way that could disenfranchise you, and you've got to think very seriously about that.
Most of us aren't qualified to understand predictive analytics. How much transparency is there regarding how it actually works?
Well, when it comes to transparency, what we do have would be a lot of frameworks, and there are over 100 frameworks or more that have been deployed on us. These frameworks, some designed by governments, some designed by organizations, many of them designed by big tech. And it's unfortunate that some of the greatest perpetrators of unethical behavior are the ones who are designing the ethical framework. So there are professional standards. Laws have been passed in Europe, and of course the UK. There is the GDPR that is really critical to the work that we do. In the US, there's the Algorithmic Accountability Act that's saying that organizations that are using algorithms must do some sort of impact assessment on these tools to ensure that bias, discrimination, systemic racism, all of these things are mitigated against. But AI ethics, and as I said, this is the space in which I stand at the moment, is really a vibrant and robust movement at this time. Much of that coming out of the US. The challenge there is it's still very Eurocentric in thinking, and although it speaks about diversity, it may not have the requisite measure of diversity that is required at this moment. There are some basic guidelines that look at privacy, security, non-discrimination, fairness, accountability, do no harm, just do no harm with this technology. But it's now about enforcement, and it's now about how robust these guardrails really are, and how do we make it as pervasive as the technology itself. Because I'm really passionate about AI, its potential, its promise, and really what it can deliver as a suite of technologies to improve society. But we know where there is reward, there is also risk. And what we've got to do is find the right balance between reward and risk, and ensure that public interest continues to be protected.
And we've started to see one or two examples of authorities or institutions actually saying, no, the current situation is wrong. So if we take Santa Cruz, for example, in June, they became the first US city to ban predictive policing because it was found to be over-policing Black and brown communities. So are authorities and police forces elsewhere paying attention to that?
Well, the police are paying attention, but at the same time, they're still designing and developing and deploying technologies. The challenge is, while some cities are doing it, all cities are not doing it. Really, in New York, there were several indictments against the NYPD for various levels of surveillance technologies that have been deployed without consent, without people knowing what's been happening, and how these things have been weaponized. In particular, during the major big protests that we saw during the Black Lives Movement, how many of these of these technologies have been deployed against protesters. We also saw the merging or the integration of contact tracing techniques and protest data coming together to really arrest people. So there are many things that are happening that are really twisting and turning the ways in which the law has to be applied. And the other thing about tech and law you would appreciate is that technology is always light years ahead of the law. The law is always playing catch up. So we have the big tech companies actually dancing around the legal system, and the dance is, doesn't include both parties. It's sort of like a solo jig. So we've really got to think about that. And I think what's happening, because so much of the money that's being spent to deploy these technologies are not being ventilated, are not being showered with sunlight. We don't know where the monies are often coming from. We don't know who's making those donations. And there are lots of boutique firms as well who are working with the police to get these technologies out there. I mean, as a criminologist, I'm committed to crime prevention and crime control, but I think the ways in which we are using algorithms really does not serve our communities in the best ways, we need to pull them up and lift them up and support them. You don't re-victimize communities or re-marginalize or continue to alienate communities using technology, using mass surveillance technologies. What we want would be investing in these communities and really reimagining the ways in which we police our Black and Brown communities, understanding also that Black and Brown data matter.
Thank you so much, Renee. It's been absolutely absorbing, as I said, to listen to you, your passion, and to actually learn about how much attention we need to pay to this if we're going to make sure that we have a just future in this highly technologically advanced 21st century that we're in. Thank you so much. And we're going to have to make way now, even though I could continue asking you questions all day. But next up, we'll be hearing from Rhiannon Thomas in a little while, who's going to be talking about conscious planning for end of life. So if you want to stick around for that, then you're in the right place. And there are also other places you can go at this Negotiating the New Normal Summit. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you so much. Have a great day and a fantastic conference.